Hello, welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Guy Murphy. Today my guest is Dr. John Elfers, who works at the Sofia University in Palo Alto, and we'll be talking about grief and gratitude. Thank you for joining me on the show today, Dr. Elfers.
You are very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
What inspired you to explore the relationship between grief and gratitude in this study, especially given how distinct these experiences often seem?
I know it's true that, grief and gratitude are rather odd bedfellows. They're not often talked about together or even in the same sentence. And part of that, if you think about it, is one, is primarily a positive emotion. Gratitude creates all these wonderful feelings, whereas grief is a source of, it's challenging, painful emotions. So, what do these two things have in common? So the original inspiration came after having done a few studies just on gratitude that I did with my colleague, Dr. Hlava. And we published a few studies, and then we created a scale that measures transpersonal gratitude, which I know we'll be talking about. But at some point, I think my colleague suggested, I wonder if there is a connection between gratitude and grief. I've been reading a little bit. I hear about it sometimes, and together. So we decided to, research those together. I guess another thing I would say about what is common to both grief and gratitude, though, even though they have different emotional profiles, is that they're both really complex and multidimensional experiences. So they involve emotions, they involve feelings in the body, they involve kind of a way of thinking, a way of expressing, a way of behaving. And so it's like grief, for instance, it's just not one thing. It's rather a complex, it has a complex profile of perhaps different stages, and it evolves. And so, they're both really rather complex.
Fantastic. And so you mentioned transpersonal gratitude. Would you mind sort of going into that a little bit deeper?
Yeah, what is it? Well, let's start with what is ordinary gratitude. And ordinary gratitude is pretty straightforward. So ordinary gratitude involves three things. It begins with some kind of benefit, a gift, a gesture, a kindness from someone. I'm hungry and you give me something to eat. And then I'm really grateful. That's the benefit, right?
Yeah.
There's also the benefactor. So someone who gives the benefit, the source of the benefit. It could be a person, it could be an institution, an experience. And then there's the beneficiary, so the person receiving the benefit. So in ordinary gratitude, there are those three things. There's the gift, and then the giver of the gift, and then the receiver.
Okay.
So, and one thing I'll say about ordinary gratitude is that it can vary, and the strength of appreciation that someone might have in response to a benefit is associated with the level of sacrifice on the part of the giver or the benefactor. So let's say, Guy, you're very wealthy and you give me a little crumb, and I go, okay, well, I'm sort of grateful. It's not too big of a sacrifice on your part. You didn't have to dig too deep.
Yeah.
But if you were poor and destitute and you had one sandwich left to your name and you shared that with me, that would be a huge sacrifice. And so the level of appreciation and gratitude would be sort of commensurate with really my perception of how much sacrifice went into that gift.
Right.
And the perceived value to me. If I'm not hungry at all, then it's like, well, I don't care if you share your sandwich with me, right?
Yeah.
But if I am hungry too, then my perception is that is a very valuable gift. So let's jump ahead. So that's sort of ordinary gratitude. So with transcendent, or what we sometimes call in the field transpersonal as well, with that kind of gratitude, the source of the benefit becomes a lot less clear. So let's say I have the experience and I just feel this sense of gratitude just for being alive, or for say, having been born in this particular place, or I'm grateful, just for this next breath that I'm going to take, truly grateful. Well, who is the giver? Who's the benefactor there? Is it life? Is it luck? Is it God? Is it, so with a transcendent gratitude, people are getting out of this realm of concrete gifts to this sense of appreciation for a more transcendent source or kind of experiences. And so in this case, the giver becomes more abstract or remote, but the feelings can be very intense. And in fact, what happens over time is if people, cultivate gratitude and really have the sense of being grateful, the transcendent experience becomes really a way of being in the world. I'm not grateful. I am immersed in gratitude. I am sort of immersed that way. And this kind of gratitude is often associated with religion because, when a strong benefit is felt like that, sometimes the source, it's easy to say, well, it's related to God or some divinity or transcendent being. And so they might attribute it to this gift that I'm receiving, like grace or something that I'm receiving from God. And one more thing, I think it's important to note that with transcendent gratitude, there is often this sense of humility. So along this, it's like, oh my gosh, look at all the benefits I've received. I'm so grateful. There's a lot less ego in that, and some people might even say, do I actually deserve this? And so at that point, there's more humility, less ego, maybe more kind of sort of compassion as part of that. You kind of get that sense, right? And that's where it really can become this way of being. I'm not appreciative for a specific gift. I'm just grateful.
Yeah.
I'm in a state of gratitude. That was really the best way to say it. And there is that term like dispositional gratitude where people just seem more naturally predisposed to being grateful and appreciative, and that's kind of like part of those states. But and there are even religious traditions that cultivate gratitude. They might see it as a spiritual discipline. And so, and I will say one of the things that my colleague and I did was to develop a scale to measure transpersonal gratitude. It's called the Transpersonal Gratitude Scale. It's 20 items that people take, and it kind of gives them a sense of kind of where they might be. And the value of that scale was actually that then we could start researching the correlation of that kind of gratitude with other, say, self-transcendent emotions like compassion or awe or other types of experiences like that. So,
okay.
I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does. So is that something that you've looked into with Dr. Hlava as well?
Yes, we've done quite a few studies on transpersonal gratitude. We found high correlations between that with awe and some with forgiveness, some gratitude with things like compassion. But the grief is, when we came to grief, that was a little more like, I wonder if there's going to really be that connection because they are so different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just wanted to quickly touch on, you mentioned sort of, an idea of kind of habit forming with these sorts of things. Do you think that to get into that sort of mind frame, it's kind of, is it just simply sort of practicing gratitude and making that an everyday part of your life and forming that into a habit, or is there something deeper at play there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. There is a lot of research demonstrating that your gratitude can be cultivated. You can work at it and enhance and increase your level of gratitude, and there are a lot of benefits of doing that. So, if you were to take time every day to consciously identify what you're grateful for, you get up in the morning you write a little bit and you think, what am I grateful for today? Or at the end of the day, what did I experience today that I am so grateful for? It puts people in the frame of mind where they're seeing the glass half full rather than chronically seeing it as half empty. And maybe people who are naturally oriented towards pessimism might benefit from some real gratitude practice. It's a kind of shift into that more optimistic mode. It really, gratitude is, as I said, it's not just a feeling, it's a way of thinking. It really is about seeing that glass as half full, so it can be a really valuable practice. And research shows that when you do that and enhance your gratitude, there's a lot of personal benefits in terms of mental health. There could be benefits in terms of your relationships. Imagine getting up every morning or at the end of the day and looking at your partner or spouse and telling them 4 things you're grateful for them. I mean, that's a great relationship enhancer, isn't it? I mean, you can just imagine that when people hear that, it kind of gives them a warm feeling. They feel loved and appreciated. And so there's many ways that can work, but certainly gratitude is also, there is the transpersonal realm, but in some of our research, we talk about relational gratitude, and that's the gratitude that just simply naturally arises in a positive relationship. It may not always get expressed, but it's there, but it can really help the relationship to start expressing that. It's more than just saying, "Oh, thank you for doing this." It's looking someone in the eye and saying, "I really appreciate everything you do for me." And wow, that's a real relationship enhancer, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. Fantastic, very interesting. Well, moving on, I just wanted to have a chat about this idea of non-dual awareness, which is throughout the study. So could you please elaborate on that concept and how that intersects with resilience and personal growth after loss?
Yeah. Well, let me say a few things about grief, though. I didn't really get to that. I meant to. Sorry. So because that relates to the non-dual. So let's talk about grief for a minute. That's, grief is primarily a response to loss. It can be the loss of a loved one. It could be a pet, or loss of a job, or a place where one's living. Fire, your house burns down. Mm-hmm. And grief is associated with a range of emotion. There can be sadness and depression and anger and blaming and abandonment and resentment, all of which are emotions which are generally unpleasant. Let's say that. There might be a little bit of, sometimes there can be positive emotions, like, I'm relieved that my parents are no longer suffering or something like that. But again, grief is very complex. There's a cognitive dimension to it. There's the deep awareness of loss. And some of the cognitions associated with grief are people like, replaying scenarios in their mind of their times together and thoughts that things will never be the same, and a lot of maybe self-blame. If I had been there more for that person, they wouldn't have died. And people go through, and all those cognitions stir up a lot of feelings. They just keep churning away at the feeling. And so when we talk about grief, though, I want to be clear that in our research, we typically talk about resilience through grief, because people can be in very different places at different times. Some people are, immersed in their grief for years, and they really haven't moved the needle much in working through it. They're just still immersed in those feelings. And so resilience through grief would be sort of moving through the process. And as we say in the field, the goal of grief is not to just get over the person, but to have a changed relationship with that person. One that's, we realize they're not there physically anymore, but they're still alive in our heart, and we can talk to them. And so, getting to this point where we're more comfortable with this new relationship with the beloved. that's sort of that, what we would say, resilience through grief. And so one of the things we found in our research in grief and gratitude was that when people reach a level of resilience through grief, or having attained a more adaptive state of grief, they naturally tend towards more gratitude. That was the big aha for us, that resilience through grief and gratitude were highly correlated. And so you can imagine that in the beginning, someone, they lose someone and they're blaming themselves and they're saying, poor me. But then when they get to the point where they can go, I am so grateful I had this relationship. My life would be so different if I did not have this 40-year relationship with my partner, and now they're gone. But I can really sit in total gratitude of that. I'm not feeling abandoned. I'm not feeling the loss. Does that make sense? I mean, that was the...
It does.
That's there is that connection. Now, I will say this. Since our study was correlational, we can't really say that working through grief is the cause of the gratitude, or that enhanced gratitude is the cause of the resilience through grief. That's going to take a little more research, but they do seem to move together. And honestly, if we think about it, the likelihood is they're very much interrelated. As I start to feel a little bit more of that gratitude, it helps me with my grief. And I feel a little better, then I feel a little more gratitude. And these two things work together. Now you had a question about non-dual awareness.
Well, if you don't mind, we can touch on that in a moment. I was actually going to mention another thing, just on that, on a similar note. You were talking about that sort of relationship between adversity and gratitude and grief and that sort of thing. I just found it interesting. There was one part, I believe it was towards the end of the article, but it was basically says post-traumatic growth has been associated with enhanced well-being and spirituality, and then it kind of, you cite a couple of studies here, and you say that, this one study by Siri in 2011 found that a history of moderate adversity predicted better outcomes than a history of high adversity or no adversity. So, which I found that quite interesting.
It really is. Guy, it comes down to this. There is this sort of everyday wisdom that, I don't know if you're familiar with this expression. We say, no pain, no gain.
Yes.
Right? If you're going to grow, there's a certain amount of adversity or challenge. I like the word maybe challenge better in this case to explain it.
Okay.
A certain amount of challenge. When you overcome a challenge, you grow, you strive, and then you triumph, and then you get the gains from that. So I think in that one study that I think with really high adversity, what happens is that people don't have a lot of coping mechanisms. Yeah. They haven't built up the coping mechanisms that they need to deal with adversity yet. And if they have really low adversity, they also have not built up the skills yet to get to that sort of sweet spot in the middle where, yes, I have been challenged in my life, I've worked through them, and I am ready to face something bigger now.
Yeah.
And so I think that would sort of be there. And are you familiar with the concept of post-traumatic growth?
Yes. Well, that was quite a prominent idea in the study that you two have authored. This one that we're chatting about. I'm correct in saying that?
Yes. We weren't studying it directly, but we were able to associate it with some of the literature around post-traumatic growth. So just briefly, what post-traumatic growth means is that, let's say you have a real challenge in your life and you have a setback and you have to work over a year or two and you really struggle, and then you get back to where you were 2 years ago. So now you're back to your baseline where you were in terms of, functionality, before that original trauma. What post-traumatic growth is saying is that for some people, they don't just come back to baseline. they enhance. So 2 years later, they're not just back at baseline, they have grown more than they were 2 years ago. So the whole outcome of this traumatic experience was for them to really grow personally. So the whole post-traumatic growth isn't just dealing with trauma. It's about you grow through the process. And so I think that's similar to what gratitude can do in terms of grief. You know, you lose someone, that's a traumatic experience. And what gratitude can do is not only sort of bring you back to a baseline of functionality, but now I am even more emotionally resilient and functional as a result of having this amazing loss. Even though I'd never do it again, but you know, I wouldn't want to ever wish that on anyone or have to go through it again. But the fact that I did, now I am in a better place.
Better equipped.
So that makes sense, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that does make sense. Fantastic. Well, thank you for explaining that in a little bit more depth. Shall we have a little bit of a chat now about the concept of non-dual awareness?
Yes. And that was a little bit of a sort of random one we threw in. It was sometimes in our studies we'll throw in something and just go, I wonder, this is sort of out there, but I wonder if we really would find some kind of connection. So let me just briefly explain what non-dual awareness is. So it's sometimes referred to as unity consciousness or a sense of oneness.
Okay.
The term non-dual basically means non-duality. So it's a state of mind in which someone's sense of identity, their ego, their sense of self is left behind, and you have this feeling of deep connection with, you know, life, with the cosmos. Sometimes when people have mystical experiences, they have this sense of the non-dual, which means, you know, I'm not a subject relating to an object. We're all just kind of one.
Yeah,
and sometimes people have this, you know, very integrated. So in this study, we thought, I wonder if when people work through resilience and grief, if they have high scores on our measures of grief, resilience, and high scores on transpersonal gratitude, if they also have a higher score on the non-dual awareness measure that we use. And the implication would be that as people work through grief and become in a state of being that is more grateful, there's a lot less ego and a lot more feeling of connection, a lot less focus on self, and a lot more focus on other people or some cause that they're involved with, you know, a more outer directed thing that they feel this deep connection with. So the measure doesn't necessarily measure like that mystical state where for 2 minutes, you know, you're, you know, you lose total contact with yourself and you totally merge with the cosmos and the universe and you're out with the stars. But the measure is really one, are people starting to approach a profound experience like that of deep connection? And that's what we found, that people are just less self-focused and more other-focused, more connected as a result of it. So that was really an aha for us, and we were pleased. And I have to say, the publisher, one of the reviewers of the article, didn't want us to share that part of the data.
Oh.
Because, you know, the non-dual, it sounds woo-woo, or it sounds too out there. I think they weren't sure that it was scientific enough to,
right.
To want to be included. But the editor said, no, it's a valid measure. I think we should share it. And so I would love to do some follow-up studies and maybe explore that relationship in more detail. That would be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a very, very interesting subject. You're listening to Wellbeing. My guest today is Dr. John Elfers from the Sofia University in Palo Alto, California. To what degree do you believe cultural differences are responsible for the way that we process grief?
Well, You raise a very interesting question, and that's, I will say, but just by way of a general comment, that in terms of grief, there's no one correct way to grieve. There's no real playbook to follow,
Okay.
and that's what counselors and things remind people. People want to compare themselves to others and go, "Am I grieving properly?" And a counselor would say, "It's your own journey. There's no playbook here." Now there are some general patterns, and patterns, I would say, rather than stages that people go through. And this is how we get some of those stages of grief. So if you know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, they're, denial and then anger and bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And while there's really no research establishing those as a literal sequence or that every person has to go through those, they do present benchmarks that people can use or ways of getting into the process. And they might say, "Boy, I've been in the anger phase for the last month here. I'm still really angry," or I'm still really in denial and I haven't reached acceptance yet. And they can be sort of signposts along the way. But and the other point then is that some cultures allow for more open expression or have different expectations around gratitude. So in some cultures, it might be, if you're not wailing and beating your chest, you are not grieving. And you must not have loved your beloved, because when you really love your beloved, you're going to be grieving very loudly and obviously. So, but other expectations, other cultures might expect one to grieve more in silence. Or to get over it right away. And but we learn a lot about this from our family as well as our culture, teaching us appropriate ways to grieve. But one of the cultural expectations might be, well, how long does it take to fully grieve? And people may expect us to get on with it, and get over it, get back to work, find a new partner, those kinds of things. But one of the things about religions, too, as a cultural phenomenon, is that they may have very specified periods of mourning. Okay. So, you wear black for a certain amount of time, and this kind of gives you a clue as to where you're supposed to be. And there's all those messages that we might get. So our families, our cultures, our personal experience teach us culturally sanctioned or appropriate ways to grieve. But even with that, some people don't follow those, and that's fine too. So there is, a strong element, I think, in however we're grieving, it's going to be viewed within a cultural milieu of other people. The one where people go, "Shouldn't you be in another relationship now? Aren't you ready to get out and date?" And it's easy to put that out there for other people, but unless you've been through it, those are really not very helpful things to say to someone. But so that's your question, and I think it's, so if we were to travel around the world, we would see very, very different ways of grieving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Interesting. And moving on, so based on your findings, what specific interventions would you recommend for clinicians or counselors working with bereaved clients?
Yeah, there is, I think, some real application to our study. I think just in general, of course, as I just said, we want to honor each person's process, and I think counselors would be trained to do that and not necessarily impose expectations, that grieving has to take a particular form, but a counselor might be sensitive to where a person really seems to be stuck. They're still really, really angry, or they're blaming themselves. If I had only been there, the person wouldn't have died. And a counselor may help people work through those things where they seem to be stuck, rather than imposing some, big expectation, when are you going to get over it? But I would say, one of the outcomes of this is that one of the signposts of progressing through grief would be more of a sense of gratitude. so a person is able to see. And so what a counselor can do, it's like, let's talk about some of the really joyful moments you had with your partner, and how were those for you? How did they enliven you? Do you still have those? Are they still in your heart? Those can be things, I think, focusing on gratitude, maybe just a little bit in the beginning, but over time, really being able to establish that sense of gratitude. Another study, which my colleague and I did recently, was on after-death communication.
Okay.
Which was, we interviewed about 45 people who had an experience of having some sort of connection with their partner, post-loss. And our study was not to establish that there's life after death or anything like that. We're not even close. It was just, if people have that subjective experience of, hearing their beloved's voice or feeling their presence or a profound dream, those kinds of things, that was associated with a higher level of grief resilience. That when people, I guess we thought of it in this way, that the after-death communication kept the relationship with that person alive in a really meaningful way. Okay. And that's what really helped them get through the process, because they really felt like, the person is not all that far away. They're right there for me, or nearby. And so I would say for counselors, even encouraging this, sometimes people do not want to say these things. They don't want to share that they've had a profound dream, for fear of being thought of as, psychotic or mentally ill or something, or that they're hearing voices. But actually, in the people, we did also a survey on this. I think 50% of our respondents said they did have some kind of after-death communication of some kind. And so it's not an unusual phenomenon, but, and so I would say to counselors too, if they could ask about those things, have you had any sort of sense or communication with, your beloved, and validating those things and working with those and encouraging people to talk to their, the person they lost.
Okay.
So, those are some things that I think are coming out of this research. I know there's more things too, and there's a whole strategy around counseling, but I think those are the new angles that we've been able to sift out in our research.
Okay, fantastic. And in terms of, you mentioned that sort of awareness, or the continuing that relationship post loss and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Would those sorts of mental techniques, would that fall under sort of a mindfulness practice, or would it be part of another sort of mental technique? Well, I think mindfulness could really help in that. In that it takes some focused attention to, really transform that relationship. And it might mean, if mindfulness, we're bringing our awareness into the present moment. And mindfulness, it might be really acknowledging, the deep sense of loss. But also, one of the things about mindfulness is that it helps us to release our attachments. Part of going through the grief process is letting go of those attachments, or transforming them into something I'm not, so attached to. And so that process of letting go, mindfulness, can really be helpful. I'm glad you brought that up, because it can be a really good technique for, practicing letting go. And there's some great techniques for doing that we get from, some of the meditative traditions. Yeah, and I guess that letting go would be, that is in and of itself transcending the ego, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, in Buddhism, they talk a lot about non-attachment as a way to, one of the things that reinforces the ego is having a lot of expectations and, control issues and ways I want things to go, and I'm not happy if they don't go my way. That's an attachment, right? But if I'm less attached, and it's like I can be flexible and like, okay, my day didn't work out the way I wanted, but I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to pine away. I'm just going to move on. And that would be more of that sense of being unattached or less attached, and then moving through that. So I'm glad you brought that up. It really can be an important feature of the whole grief and growth process.
Yeah, fantastic. So do you see potential for incorporating gratitude practices before loss, for example, advanced resiliency training? And how would that look in practice, if so?
Yeah, so honestly, that would be a very interesting line of research. I'm not aware of any, direct research on that directly. It might be out there, maybe I just haven't come across it. But intuitively, my sense is that if someone were to really implement a gratitude practice or discipline where they made that a primary focus for them, they really want to enhance their gratitude, I promise there will be mental health benefits, and it will definitely benefit, relationships and kind of social awareness for sure. Now, whether that would actually then allow the person to be better prepared, for a loss, and would it prepare them better for the grief process? My intuitive sense says yes, based on what I know, but that's not coming from solid data. It's just my sense is that when someone is more emotionally resilient, I think, then their ability to work through a profound loss they would just be in a better place. They're starting at that higher level. It's kind of like going back to that post-traumatic growth where not only do you heal from the growth and come back to baseline, but you go to another level of functionality and emotional resilience. And I think working on it ahead of time really could be. And so in a way, I'm sort of advocating for just a general gratitude practice anyway. There's a lot of mental health benefit, and some of those really could be, the ability to deal with losses in the future, whether it be, loss of a job, or your house burns down, or something really goes awry, of some natural disaster, something your level of emotional resilience, I think, would be a lot higher. So it's a good question, and I would love to, maybe I'll think about that as some interesting research studies down the road.
Yeah, perhaps we'll catch up again sometime in the future and we can revisit that, maybe even.
I would love to. That would be great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. That's all we've got time for today, but thank you, Dr. Elfers, for joining us on the show.
You're very welcome. I appreciate it, and I love talking about this. And if you get any feedback from your listeners, let me know. I'd love to hear any feedback that you get.
Absolutely. No, it's such an interesting topic, and I dare say that that those tuning in will be very interested in it as well. So thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
My guest today was Dr. John Elfers. Thank you again for joining us on the show. Thank you for listening. I'm Guy Murphy, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.